If you've heard my podcast before, you know I'm always trying to make a difference in the lives of children. Well, I found a way we can all do that. How would you feel if your morning coffee helped end the epidemic of child hunger? No, I'm not kidding. I'm super proud to be partnering with Free Lunch Coffee, a company on a mission to end hunger in the lives of young children. When you buy just one bag of Free Lunch Coffee, you're also providing 10 meals to children in need. If that wasn't awesome enough, Free Lunch Coffee gives away 50% of the money they make to end hunger in the lives of young children. How incredible is that? This coffee is specialty grade, certified organic, and fair trade. They also have some really nice custom-made mugs and tumblers, all the way from a standard size 11-ounce coffee mug to my favorite, the enormous 32-ounce tumbler, which is the size I use every day. Buying any of these items from Free Lunch Coffee provides 10 meals to underprivileged children, so you literally can't go wrong. They offer a 100% money-back guarantee for 30 days. If you don't absolutely love their coffee, they'll give you a full refund, and you can even keep the coffee. You have nothing to lose. Free Lunch Coffee is offering a generous 15% discount to my loyal listeners. You can use coupon code CHILDREN at checkout. There's no downside here. You get a bag of delicious coffee or a cool new mug. You're helping me out by using the coupon code CHILDREN, and you're feeding hungry kids. Check it out at freelunchcoffee.com and remember to use my promo code CHILDREN. This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 49, Quortney Kley. On February 25th, 1997, 23-year-old Cayce Williams entered the emergency room at St. Joseph's Hospital in Elgin, Illinois, carrying the lifeless body of his girlfriend's 20-month-old daughter, Quortney Kley. Medical staff immediately called police, who arrested Cayce the same evening. Cayce was charged with several felony counts of murder, as well as predatory criminal sexual assault. 9 long years later, Cayce Williams accepted a plea agreement and was sentenced to 48 years in Illinois State Prison. Due to a change in Illinois law, he was only required to serve 24 of those years behind bars. Now, he is scheduled to be released from the Dixon Correctional Center 2 weeks from this episode's release date. In this episode, you'll hear my conversation with Quortney's mom, Gretta, in which we talk about her beloved, stubborn, sassy baby girl, whose rapist and murderer is preparing to walk free from prison on February 25th. This is the mind-boggling story of Quortney Kley. My sources for this week were the Chicago Tribune, The Sun, an article by Barbara J. Zaha, Ancestry.com, Mugshots.com, the Kane County 16th Judicial Circuit Court portal, and Quortney's mom, Gretta. I'd like to give a shout out to my newest patron, Maria, from my home province of Alberta, Canada. Thank you so much, Maria. Every pledge brings me closer to my goal of permanently devoting myself full-time to the podcast and to sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com, and I truly appreciate your support. Shout out also to the sponsors of today's episode, Free Lunch Coffee and Smile Brilliant, both of whom I'm really excited to be partnering with. Please check them out, and if you want to support me, please support my sponsors. I'd also like to mention that I've created a Facebook discussion group for anyone interested in discussing the cases I've covered on the podcast or the blog in a more private, members-only environment. I'll provide a link to the group in my show notes, and you can also find it by searching Suffer the Little Children Case Discussion Group on Facebook. Before I get into today's story, I'd like to address something quickly. Although I think the word triggered is overused, the topic I'm about to bring up has been legitimately triggering to me lately, and that is the topic of victim blaming. It happens all the time when a victim of domestic abuse or sexual abuse comes forward to name their abuser. Last week, actress Evan Rachel Wood, as well as several other women, named musician Marilyn Manson as their abuser, saying that he mistreated, manipulated, and emotionally and sexually abused them during their relationships with him. Immediately, the victim blamers, defenders, and apologists started coming out of the woodwork, and I spent more time than was probably healthy debating the finer points of narcissistic abuse with these people online. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it happens all the time on my social media posts as well. No matter who the perpetrator is, too many people's first reaction is to blame an innocent parent for not being present, not being vigilant enough, etc. In some cases, absolutely, the other parent should be held accountable when provable negligence is involved, and in some cases, they may face prosecution or other repercussions for their negligence. For example, Charlotte Dawkins' mother, Caitlin, was never charged with a crime after her boyfriend, who she later married, backhanded her daughter down the stairs. She was, however, found to be partially responsible by Child Protective Services, and as a result, she lost custody of her younger daughter for a few years. In the case of Jaheim Harris, his mother, Danielle, was charged with violating a no-contact order by allowing her ex-boyfriend to babysit her children, resulting in the man beating Jaheim to death. It's one thing to point fingers at the mothers in those and other similar cases when they performed a proven criminal or negligent act. However, in cases where no negligence has been charged, we can't automatically look to blame the mother or someone else for failing to protect a child. Things are not always black and white. There are shades of gray in life, and it would do all of us well to remember that. Max Schollenberger's mother, for example, was alienated from her son's life for many years and ceased pursuing her narcissistic ex-boyfriend as he moved his family from place to place, making it impossible for her to find them until Max died last May. People online are quick to pipe up about how she should have tried harder, should have done this, should have done that. That kind of finger-pointing is nothing but victim-blaming, and as exhausting as it is and sometimes as pointless as it seems, I will fight against it until my last breath. We need to have empathy for all victims. Absolutely, the children I talk about are paramount, and we have to do everything we can to protect the children in our lives. However, in a situation where a child dies at the hands of someone who has been charged in that child's death, we can't always rush to blame others. In the example I just gave, Max's mom is in no way to blame for his death. That responsibility lies solely in the hands of his father and stepmother, who await trial for Max's murder. Sure, in many of these cases, different choices may have led to different outcomes, but you can't say for a fact what you'd do or what choice you'd make in any given situation, and publicly criticizing someone based on what you think you'd do is not helpful. All I'm trying to say is that we all need to remember that these cases involve real people with real feelings and real regrets who have been through the most devastating loss a human being can experience, and we need to have empathy for them. They undoubtedly beat themselves up enough every hour of every day without cruel and insensitive online commenters jumping in with their 2 cents. Okay, rant over. I don't know if I feel any better or not. Now let's get into the story of precious baby Quortney Kley. Quortney Alexandria Kley was born in Elgin, Illinois on June 13, 1995, the second child of her parents, Gretta and Jesse, whose relationship ended around the time Quortney was born. Toward the end of her pregnancy, Gretta began experiencing swelling and discomfort. Luckily, she fought for a same-day appointment, during which her doctor diagnosed her with severe preeclampsia and immediately sent her to the hospital for an emergency C-section. Had Quortney not been born that very day, she would not have survived. For a time, Gretta lived with her dad, who was having some health issues. Infant Quortney stayed with her, but her older daughter, Christina, who was about 3, lived for a while with her grandmother, Jesse's mom. Space was tight at Grandpa Jim's house, but money was even tighter, and Gretta, her dad, and Quortney found themselves living without electricity and running water at times. Of course, Gretta wanted a better life for herself and her daughters. During this time, by chance, she ran into someone she had dated as a teenager, a young man the same age as Gretta, named Cayce Williams. Gretta and Cayce didn't attend the same high school, but they met when one of Gretta's friends dated Cayce's brother. Gretta and Cayce began dating on her 16th birthday. Their eventual breakup was very odd, as Gretta remembered it. She came home one day and found a note on her front door from Cayce saying they were through. It was the 90s equivalent of dumping someone by text. When Gretta ran into Cayce a few years later and he expressed interest in getting back together, she eventually agreed, convinced in part when Cayce gave her an old car to drive. They soon moved in together, allowing Gretta to give her daughters a more appropriate environment. Christina and Quortney loved to play together. They both had their mom's bright red hair and beautiful blue eyes. Cayce worked as a window washer for high-rise buildings and some residential properties, mainly working during the more temperate months. Gretta worked for an answering service, fielding phone calls for multiple businesses, including medical providers. Because of their schedules, while Cayce was laid off for the winter, it made sense for him to watch Christina and Quortney while Gretta worked. Gretta trusted Cayce. She had known him for years, and he had never given her any reason to fear leaving him alone with the girls. There was one incident in which Cayce slapped Christina across the face, at which point Gretta immediately kicked him out, telling him they were over. Before long, Cayce's father, Michael Williams, who was at the time serving a prison sentence for drug distribution, called Gretta and talked her into taking his son back, insisting that Cayce was terribly sorry and that he would never do such a thing again. Gretta, who was in her very early 20s at the time, reluctantly agreed to give Cayce another chance, and he was, for a while, on his best behavior. On February 1st, 1997, to her surprise, Gretta received a visit from a CPS worker who was investigating a report from a neighbor who had taken 5-year-old Christina into their home after finding her supposedly wandering around outside the apartment complex. As it turned out, when Gretta went to work, Christina decided to leave the apartment and visit a friend who lived across the parking lot, which was not an unusual occurrence. After she left her friend's apartment, Christina was evidently spotted by the neighbor outside in the rain, who tried to take the little girl back to her home, but Christina resisted, insisting she didn't want to go home. The reason was not as nefarious as the neighbor apparently thought, however. Christina just wanted to stay and play with her friend, rather than going home immediately. CPS had no concerns after the home visit. Because they had 60 days to complete the investigation, though, it was still technically open 2 weeks later, when Gretta's world fell apart. At around 10 p.m. on Tuesday, February 25, 1997, 23-year-old Cayce Williams walked into the emergency room at St. Joseph's Hospital in Elgin, carrying the tiny, lifeless body of his girlfriend's toddler. Despite the best efforts of medical staff, it was too late, and Quortney Alexandria Kley was pronounced dead on arrival at just 20 months old. Soon afterward, Gretta received a phone call at work from the hospital, notifying her that one of her daughters was in critical condition. Panicked, Gretta asked a friend and co-worker named Kelly to give her a ride to the hospital. Prior to Gretta's arrival at the emergency room, her father, Jim, arrived and started looking for Christina, who he found sitting in Cayce's car in the parking lot. Cayce had left the 5-year-old by herself in the car to take her sister into the emergency room. Once Gretta reached the hospital, she was taken into a room to await further information. A doctor eventually came in to tell her that Quortney had been severely injured and had not survived. Many years later, Jim wrote of the experience, "I got to the hospital before my daughter. May you never hear a sound from one of yours, like I heard from her when they broke the news that day. She still grieves." The doctor told Gretta he believed that Quortney had been abused, but they were unable to tell her the type or severity of the baby's injuries. All Gretta could think was that Quortney must have fallen out of her brand-new big girl bed. She couldn't fathom that the man she loved and trusted could have caused her baby's death. Because of the horrific injuries Quortney had suffered, hospital staff immediately contacted the Elgin Police Department. When officers arrived to investigate, they found many of the nurses who had attended to Quortney in tears. When Cayce was informed that Quortney was dead, he reportedly went berserk, trying to get to her, at which point he was arrested for disorderly conduct. Cayce was taken to the Elgin Police Department, where he was interviewed by officers from the Major Investigations Division, as well as representatives from the Kane County Child Advocacy Center. During his recorded interrogation, Cayce reportedly told investigators that he was sitting in bed, wearing only a sweatshirt, when Quortney toddled into the room. He said he sat on the edge of the bed, where, for whatever unfathomable reason, he tried to put his penis in the baby's mouth. She wouldn't stop crying, he said, so he put one hand over her mouth and held her by the back of the head until she stopped crying, at which point he considered staging the scene to make it appear that Quortney had suffocated on a plastic bag. Instead, he decided to take Quortney to the hospital, so he rounded up both girls and drove to St. Joseph's. Based on Quortney's injuries and Cayce's statements, he was charged that evening with predatory criminal sexual assault and booked into the Kane County Jail, where he was held in lieu of $500,000 bond. On the evening Quortney died, DCFS took Christina into temporary protective custody. Stunned and heartbroken, Gretta went to stay with her mom, who lived a half hour or so away. 2 days later, Kane County Coroner Mary Lou Kearns ruled Quortney's death a homicide caused by multiple blunt force injuries to the head and torso, in addition to internal bleeding. The case was brought before a Kane County grand jury, and in early March of 1997, Cayce Williams was indicted on multiple counts of felony first-degree murder and predatory criminal sexual assault, a Class X felony, which in Illinois is the most serious crime a person can commit besides first-degree murder. Sweet baby Quortney was buried soon afterward at a cemetery in Elgin. She was laid to rest in a tiny pink casket. Gretta's family was not immediately told the results of the autopsy. In fact, they were watching the news when they heard the announcement that Quortney had been sexually assaulted and murdered. Because Cayce had their house keys in his possession when he was arrested, at one point Gretta had to go to the Kane County Jail to claim Cayce's belongings. They would not allow her to take only the keys, so she had to claim everything. In the package with the keys, Cayce's wallet, and other items was a charging document, and when Gretta began to skim it, she was horrified to read Cayce's statement to police about his sexual assault of her tiny, innocent daughter. Realizing there was much more to the story than she was being told, Gretta left the jail, throwing the rest of Cayce's possessions into the trash can on her way out. Gretta eventually received a copy of the autopsy report, after which she also spoke with the coroner by phone and learned that if Quortney had somehow survived her injuries, she would have spent the rest of her life in a vegetative state. Quortney had suffered multiple horrific injuries, including bite marks on her stomach, bruises around her ankles indicating she had been restrained by hand, and trauma to the back of her head that officials believed Cayce had inflicted by kicking the helpless toddler in the back of the head. To make matters worse, news outlets had gotten wind of the CPS case opened when Christina was found outside by a neighbor, and they began misreporting it, saying that Quortney had been found wandering around outside the apartment building. Gretta began receiving harassing phone calls and even threats over this false reporting. I spoke earlier about how damaging, unfair, and unnecessary victim blaming is. Imagine how you'd feel after losing a child, then finding out she was sexually abused and brutally murdered by someone you loved and trusted, and then being harassed and threatened by strangers over something that never even happened. It's beyond comprehension. About 2 weeks after Quortney's death, Gretta received a letter from Cayce in jail. In the letter, he apologized for what he had done, and he swore that during his mere days behind bars, he had already found God. How convenient for him. Sometime after losing her daughter, Gretta was cleaning out her bedroom closet when she came across a pillow that had been stuffed into the back of the closet. She had no idea how or when the pillow, which came from the bed, could have ended up there. When she pulled the pillow out, she saw that it was covered in blood and realized it was involved in Cayce's assault of Quortney. In a case like this, it's natural that the victim's family would want swift justice, but they would not be afforded that kindness. Cayce would spend the next 9 years in county jail as the case crawled through the legal system, dragging Quortney's helpless family behind it. In November of 1997, Cayce's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the sexual assault charge, citing a lack of physical evidence. The motion was ultimately denied. In March of 1998, the Kane County Prosecutor's Office announced its intent to seek the death penalty against then 25-year-old Cayce Michael Williams, whose attorneys quickly filed a motion for the appointment of an expert witness and allocation of expenses for that expert. That motion was approved, and mitigation specialist Jeffrey Eno was retained for the defense. For years, motion after motion after motion delayed the case. The defense repeatedly moved to quash and suppress the recorded statement Cayce gave to the Elgin police on the night of Quortney's murder, saying it was unconstitutional. Witnesses were repeatedly subpoenaed, including multiple law enforcement and medical personnel. Over and over again, the case drew close to trial, only for Cayce to fire his attorney, which dragged the case out even longer as a new attorney had to step in and start from scratch. At one point, Gretta was told by her victim's advocate that she could not attend any of the hearings because she was to be a witness in the case. In reality, that was untrue, and after months of being in the dark, Gretta was relieved when the judge declared in October of 2001 that she was henceforth allowed to appear in court for any and all hearings. Also in 2001, the governor of Illinois imposed a moratorium on the death penalty to avoid the execution of innocent people. Even if Cayce were sentenced to death, he would likely never face execution. While Cayce was in the Kane County Jail, his father, Michael Williams, made plenty of noise about the conditions and treatment his son suffered. In September of 2003, Michael went before the Kane County Board and begged them to launch an immediate investigation of 7 allegations Cayce had filed of inhumane treatment, abuse, and rights violations within the jail. Michael told the board, "The indifference that is shown by Sheriff Ramsey is unbelievable. He allows physical, emotional, and mental abuse to occur on a daily basis. This is a travesty against justice. It is an abomination." Among Cayce's complaints were stories that guards ignored inmates banging on their cell bars when they needed something, that a guard ignored an inmate who tried to commit suicide by hanging himself in his cell, and that guards would provoke fights among the inmates. Todd Exline, the commander of the Kane County Jail, said of Cayce's allegations, "He's put a couple of grievances in, but as far as the sheriff's office is concerned, they have all been resolved." There is no record of what resolution, if any, came of Michael's appearance before the board. During the long, drawn-out court process, Michael continued to insert himself into the proceedings in every way possible. When things didn't seem to be going his son's way, Michael had no qualms about intimidating and even threatening anyone he deemed responsible, including Cayce's attorneys, some retained, some court-appointed. Finally, in December of 2003, the judge barred Michael from contacting any member of the defense for any reason during the course of the public defender's representation of his son, whether in person, by telephone, or in writing. That included attorneys, investigators, and support staff, according to court records. That court order went a long way to proving how good and how prolific Michael was at harassment and intimidation. Throughout the 9 years the case wound its way through the legal system, there were multiple personnel changes that further delayed matters. There were at least 7 defense lawyers involved at various different times. 3 prosecutors came and went, and in November of 2003, 6.5 years after Quortney's murder, Judge Donald C. Hudson recused himself from the case, citing reasons on record, and was replaced by Judge Timothy Q. Sheldon. Finally, after over 9 years, the prosecution reached an agreement with the defense, and in May of 2006, Cayce Williams pleaded guilty to 1 count of murder and 1 count of predatory criminal sexual assault. In court, he was compelled to admit to raping and murdering 20-month-old Quortney Alexandria Kley on February 25, 1997. The remaining counts were dismissed, and Cayce was sentenced to 40 years in prison for Quortney's murder and a consecutive 8 years for the sexual assault. Post-release, he will be required to register as a sex offender. At the time of his sentencing, Cayce was 33 years old. When he was charged in 1997, Illinois' Truth in Sentencing law required those convicted of a violent crime to serve 100% of their sentence. For sexual crimes, the requirement was 85%. Cayce should have been forced to spend nearly 47 years in prison for his crimes, less 3,375 days credit for time served. Based on sentencing guidelines in place when he was arrested, Cayce should have been incarcerated until he was over 70 years old. In 1999, however, the Illinois Supreme Court ruled the Truth in Sentencing law unconstitutional because it violated the single-subject legislation requirement under the Illinois Constitution. Because of this ruling, Cayce would be one of approximately 2,500 convicted felons affected, meaning he would only be required to complete 50% of his sentence. What does this mean to the layperson? Well, it means a man who admittedly raped and murdered a 20-month-old baby will be walking out of prison a free man on February 25, 2021. That's 2 weeks from this episode's release date, and it's also the 24-year anniversary of Quortney Kley's death. Cayce Williams is 47 years old. After Cayce's sentencing, Gretta received constant harassment and threats from his family. One of his brothers left at least 20 threatening phone messages for her. As Gretta left the courtroom after Cayce was sentenced, his father, Michael, snarled at her, "You're going to get yours." A few months later, Gretta, with her new husband and her children, moved out of state. Gretta now works as a paralegal, a career she chose in light of Quortney's murder and her resultant experiences. On Friday, January 29th, just about a week and a half ago, Gretta received a phone call from a victim's advocate notifying her that her precious daughter's rapist and murderer would be released from prison less than a month later, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. Stunned and helpless, Gretta contacted the Chicago Tribune, which ran a story on February 1st about the impending release of this violent, dangerous man. The paper quoted Gretta as saying, "You go into this mental shock. You go into that flight or fight mode. What do I do next? I don't really understand what's going on. I feel like I'm losing my mind." The Tribune spoke to Jason Sweat, an attorney for the Illinois Prison Review Board, who said the board has not and will not take a vote on Cayce's release. "He's reaching the natural termination of his sentence handed out in court. The board will be setting conditions for his hearing of mandatory supervised release." Illinois law provides standard conditions required for parole, including barring felons from possessing weapons or from contacting the victim's family. According to Sweat, parolees are sometimes required to remain on electronic home monitoring, and other conditions may apply to Cayce due to his status as a sex offender. Sweat told the Tribune that victims' families are allowed to reach out to the parole board to request other conditions. Cayce is reportedly hoping to live with his father once he is released from prison. Michael is also a convicted felon who completed his sentence for drug dealing after his son's arrest for murdering and raping his girlfriend's baby. If nothing else, Michael is a shining example of community involvement. Here he is speaking about illegal immigration at a Carpentersville Town Council meeting several years back.
Good evening. I'd like to talk about the ordinance, of course. I want to say a few brief things.
Which ordinance are you talking about?
How are we doing this? You know, the one. That one.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, but we can't talk about the ordinance.
We're talking about the immigration situation, Bill.
You can talk about the immigration, but not the ordinance itself. That's been tabled.
So is freedom of speech in this town, you know that? I'm going to tell you something real brief so I can get out of here. I'm late for Chinese dinner.
Okay? Go ahead.
I'm really wasting my time anyway.
Well,
but here's the deal.
Go ahead.
The deal is this. This is supposed to be the land of the brave and the home of the free. Just how do you think it got to be that way? It got to be that way because your heritage, your lineage, my lineage fought to keep it that way. And that's what they're doing today. Only we're fighting for borders of other countries instead of our own. And that, to me, is a direct insult as an American. I have nothing, but nothing against any culture, any race of people. But it seems to be, I don't know, there's something in the air that says stupid everywhere I go. Legal means legal, illegal means illegal. Simple, short, to the point. That's it. End of story. I heard that you're writing a letter to Washington, D.C., the main spin masters of the whole world. Washington, D.C. isn't doing a thing for the American people. Period. Whether it's Bush or the next one coming in. The only thing they care about, and the only thing it appears this board cares about, are the business people. The hell with the business people, because we outnumber them like 100,000 to 1. We are the one that cast the votes. We are the ones that pay the bills. It sure isn't the small little business people of Podunk, USA. This is Carpentersville, Illinois. I've lived here all my life. How about you? Obviously not. Things have got to change in this town, and they got to change quick instead of everybody sitting on their thumbs talking about it for the next year and a half. And that's what I've got to say.
He certainly has proven he's passionate about his beliefs, not to mention his Chinese food. Anyway, I'm not certain a parolee can actually live with a felon post-release, so I'm hoping Cayce will be sent to a halfway house or something along those lines, and not sent to live with the man who raised him, for better or for obviously much, much worse. Gretta told the Tribune that she wished she could argue before the parole board. "There's a million things I'd want to tell them. Where do you even start? I started making a list of points I wanted to go through for an impact statement if it even makes any difference. I had to stop. I can only mentally handle so much of this right now." When I learned of Quortney's story last week and the impending release of the human monster who desecrated and executed her, I was not only furious, but even more so, filled with empathy for Gretta and her family. After everything she and Christina in particular have gone through, to have to deal with this nightmare of a man being released from prison is beyond horrific. I reached out to Gretta last week, and she graciously agreed to talk with me on the podcast. I don't want Quortney to be forgotten amidst all this talk of her killer's release, and Gretta very much agrees. We had a long conversation over the weekend, and I think you'll enjoy hearing it as much as I enjoyed having it. With all the video conferencing and virtual meetings going on these days, we all want to look our best. If you're like me, you're probably confused by all the different methods of teeth whitening on the market. Now that I'm partnering with Smile Brilliant, I've learned a few things that you might find helpful about home teeth whitening methods. For example, LED lights are a novelty item. Whitening strips neglect the gum lines, crevices, and molars. Charcoal is abrasive and wears down your enamel. And whitening toothpaste only works on surface stains. So if none of these miracle products really works, what does? The number one product recommended by dentists is the custom-fitted tray, which usually costs an arm and a leg because they require a dentist to make them by hand using a model of your teeth. With Smile Brilliant's Lab Direct process, you can get custom-fitted teeth whitening trays at a fraction of the price without a single visit to the dentist. Using an exact model of your teeth, Smile Brilliant's lab technicians will handcraft your trays to give you the best possible whitening results. All you have to do is visit smilebrilliant.com, and when you order their system, make sure you use the coupon code CHILDREN at checkout for 30% off. When you receive the package from Smile Brilliant, it's really simple. You just make your dental impressions at home and return them using the prepaid envelope they provide you. In a matter of 1 week, Smile Brilliant will have your trays back in the mail. Using my coupon code, CHILDREN, means you're supporting me while saving a huge amount of money, so check out smilebrilliant.com today.
This whole thing just throws me way off because I can't forgive, like a lot of people say. I have a friend who is a priest that is on my Facebook. And at one point, I finally asked him, I don't understand. There's no way that I could ever forgive him. And, he kind of pointed out that some people say that, not that they necessarily forgive the person, but they forgive the act, where they can function themselves. It's not for the other person, it's for them, to try and say, okay, I'm done. I'm going to move on from some of this stuff that I've harbored for so long. And I just not been able to.
It's got to be very individual, and there's a lot of factors that play into it. The relationship you had prior to this happening and what you know about him and what he did in particular. It's just so heinous. It must be so difficult. And then getting this news on top of already living with that other information in your head for the past 24 years.
Yeah. There's nothing that I could do to him that would ever amount to what he did to me. There's no payback for that. I have documents and I have photos that most people in my situation would not have. I get angry and want to post them online so that everybody sees what he did. I have the coroner's report. I have that lovely sketch of a child's body where it marks everywhere that she was hurt. I have her last picture, which was the picture that they took of her right before her autopsy.
Once you've seen it, it's in your mind forever.
Part of me wants to put it out there and say, this is what he did to my baby. I don't think that's right either. I don't want to look like I've lost my mind, but
you have a very good reason to feel that way because you know exactly how it feels for something like this to happen. And I am sure you don't want anyone else to go through it.
No, not at all.
Yeah, warning people that this man is out there is actually a public service on your part.
Yeah.
And that's definitely part of why, I'm glad that the news coverage is happening, and it's a big part of why I want to help get that story out there as well. But the main thing, of course, is remembering Quortney and learning about her, and she can't be forgotten in all of this. The rest of the story is secondary. She's not defined by what happened to her.
No.
I saw when I went through the court case, there was one entry, maybe it was around 2003, but it said Michael Williams was barred from contacting anyone on the defense team, lawyers, witnesses, anybody.
Yeah, he threatened the attorney. So they wanted to switch attorneys, and the judge would not let the attorney pull off the case because he was tired of this show of getting right to trial and then switching attorneys. And so the judge says, no, you're not switching attorneys this time. And so Dad figured the only other way to get him off is to threaten him to the point where the attorney was scared.
It shows for sure that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I mean, if that's how he grew up, seeing his dad handling conflict in that way, yeah, sure, violence is going to be the first thing he resorts to when he has any kind of conflict. Of course, you beat yourself up because that's just what we do. But I hope you've stopped doing that at least as much as you possibly can because...
Yeah, I still all the time. I mean, right before this happened, I was pretty much sleeping on the couch. I had told him that when I got my tax return, I wanted to move out. And, he freaked out. And I said, no, I still want to be together. I just want to know that I can do it on my own. I feel like, I'm relying too much on you. It was kind of this situation where I knew something was off. There was too many fights about the kids, that they weren't his kids, and that, he was angry that I had kids with somebody else.
You were married in the meantime, right? You married someone else.
Yeah. And so, when I told him I was going to move out, he got really upset. And I kind of backtracked and said, oh, I just want to, know that I can live on my own, that I can do it on my own with the kids. I'm not saying we're going to break up, this, that, and the other. And then probably a week after I got my tax return is when she died. And so I've always thought that there was a little bit to that I was going to leave.
Yeah, definitely.
A little bit of he was jealous of the kids.
That's the most dangerous time when a woman leaves an abusive relationship. And the fact that he was jealous of them, that's another, I guess you'd say, red flag. It's a common theme throughout these awful stories.
After a while, I mean, especially after this, there was definitely signs that I saw that I was surprised that I didn't notice before. And some of them, it probably was that, I had 2 kids and I was working full time. I was also going to school. I was taking 3 classes at the time. So, I was all kinds of busy. And I regret not stepping back for a moment and looking at the big picture and seeing how dangerous things were.
You met Cayce when you were in high school, or did you know him before that?
I met him in high school. Well, I didn't meet him at my high school. A friend of mine was dating his brother. So we were hanging out with the brother that she was dating and the older brother. And we were over there the one night and Cayce came over. And that's when, we started, not even seeing each other yet, but, playing that little high school game.
Just making eyes at each other across the room.
Other. And so, on my 16th birthday, we started dating.
So you dated him for a while?
Yeah, we dated for a while. And I came home. We had gotten home from somewhere. I don't remember where we had been, but there was a note on the door. And the note said, I called, some guy answered, we broke up. I'm like, well, I wasn't home. There weren't, nobody really had cell phones back then unless you had some money. So, it was the weirdest thing ever. And, for a while I was devastated. When we got back together, it was at a time where, I was living with my father and he wasn't working. And, I was working a job where I was making, if I was lucky, making $6 an hour. Our electric had gotten shut off and I would run electric from the neighbor's house. Our water got shut off. Quortney was really little. And I had sent my daughter, Christina, to live with her grandmother, my ex-husband's mom. Christina went to live with her for a little bit while I was in this predicament. And it had started to get a little cold out. And when you don't have any electric or gas, when you're living in Illinois and it starts to get a little cold in an old house, start to weigh your options on what you're going to do. And I had run into Cayce and it seemed like kind of this perfect situation where he had a second car and he gave me a car to drive. And so for a little bit, I had that car and I would go out at the coldest time at night, and I would sleep in the car with her on my chest, trying to figure out what to do. And so we ended up moving in together.
Basically, Quortney lived with him for a good part of her life then.
Her whole life, yeah.
So for people to turn on you after this happened and try to blame you for it, I mean, you knew him for so long and you had always trusted him around the kids.
Yeah. Yeah. There was that one instance, and that was later on in the relationship, when he met Christina, and I instantly reacted. And his dad called and kind of made me feel a little guilty that, it was a one-time thing, it was just an accident kind of. He would never harm the kids, this kind of thing. And so I thought maybe I was overreacting.
They're very good at picking out who will be a good victim for them and who's susceptible to their charms and their intimidation. It's scary how good they are at that.
Yeah.
So I guess Michael definitely had the better or the more honed skills at the time.
Absolutely. I mean, he calls me from federal prison and talks me.
Oh, he was still in prison.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That's something right there.
Absolutely. I see articles all the time, where you see that children have died and, there was a boyfriend involved. And it kills me when you see all these people say, well, once again, why did she leave the kids with the boyfriend? Well, is it going to make a difference if it was a stepdad? It's a significant other. And just because it says boyfriend doesn't mean they haven't been together for 20 some years. Or, in our case, we've been together for almost 2 years at that point, the second time.
I think I made that argument somewhere on Facebook last night when I was looking up articles about this case. It's always, where was the mom? Where was the mom? Sometimes you can't blame anyone but the offender. It's entirely on him. And especially in this case, you hadn't seen anything other than the one incident. It's not like your kids were turning up with bruises every time you came home or anything like that.
When this all happened, the hospital called and said that they had my daughter in critical condition. They wouldn't tell me which daughter. And so, when I find out it's Quortney, my first thought was that we had just put Quortney into a big kid's bed. And I was worried that she somehow quit breathing by, getting her head caught in like the headboard or the footboard or, because they had the slats. And I just couldn't, it just didn't even cross my mind at that moment that he would have done something this horrific.
So you were at work and you just out of the blue got a call from the hospital. He didn't even call you.
No, he had taken me to work that day. And so I didn't have a car. So I had one of the girls that I worked with took me and we had to go across town. It was the longest drive of my life. And when we got there to the emergency room, it was swarmed with cop cars, their lights on. I got out of the car and I instantly felt in my chest that something was not right. This is wrong. This is really, really wrong. And, we walked in and they brought me into a room and that's where the doctor came and told me. I found out later that at the time that I walked in, Cayce was sitting in one of those cop cars, probably watching me walk into the hospital knowing what I was about to find out. So I'll back up to earlier that night. We were running late. And so, I remember getting Quortney's shoes on her and talking to her. And anytime I do anything with the kids, I would always explain what I was doing. And so I would be really funny with Quortney and I'd go, this is your shoe. Let's put your shoe on. Let's get your sock on. And I'd always talk about what we were, we're putting her shoe on her foot, things like that. And I remember doing all that and her getting up and being excited that we were going to go in the car and go somewhere. And so we all went and he took me to work. He and Christina always had this, it always seemed like a love-hate relationship. They were always kind of fighting with each other. And she was grounded from the TV and she always gave him a hard time when it was bedtime. And so I asked him how she was and he said, fine, she went to bed. So then he said, well, Quortney was giving me a hard time and she wouldn't go to sleep, so I killed her. And I go, well, that's not even funny. Why would you joke about something like that? He's like, oh, and I just, and then he kind of just put it away. Well, later on, I find out that was true, that he had already done all of this. And when I had called from work, he was sitting in the living room with her on the floor, just staring at her, trying to figure out what to do. And I guess he staged it to look like she had fallen asleep on a plastic bag. And he was going to let me come home and find her like that. And then for some reason, he changed his mind and decided to take her to the hospital. And so he got Christina up and put Christina in the car and put her sister at her feet and drove to the hospital. When he got to the hospital, he took Quortney out of the car and in the hospital and left Christina sitting in the van. So I don't know how long she had sat there. I don't know what she saw. I don't know any of it. She's blocked a lot of it out. She doesn't talk about it.
He was arrested immediately.
Yeah, when he was at the hospital, they arrested him for disorderly conduct. From what I remember them telling me, when they told him that she was dead, he tried to get to her. And that's when they ended up arresting him for that. The crazy thing is, and a lot of people I don't think really understand, unless you're in that situation, of course, is that it's almost like an out-of-body experience, like you have a split personality when they tell you something like that. Because I remember my dad was on my right and my friend Kelly, who had driven me, was on my left, and the doctor was sitting across from me on the couch when he came in to tell me that she was gone. That she died. And I remember sitting in there thinking, why am I not responding? Why am I not doing anything? How can I just be sitting here? And who is screaming? I kept thinking, who's screaming? Who is that screaming like that? And it was later that my dad told me it was me, that I was the one that was screaming and that he had to hold me down because I just lost it. And I guess that was that moment that I had a break.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Did they know at the time that it was abuse, or did they have to wait for the autopsy to come back for that?
The doctor said right away that he believed it was abuse. There was never any signs of anything like that previous. Nothing.
What did they end up ruling?
Blunt force trauma, I believe. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I know there was the blunt force trauma. Okay. So I don't know if they were specific with the body or the head, but in reading the autopsy report, it was brutal. Reading the autopsy report and knowing specifically things that he did to her, I mean, they can be very specific in those reports. They believe that he kicked her to the back of the head, that when he did that, it knocked out her eyesight. There were bite marks on her stomach. There were grab marks around her ankle. I just can't imagine what she went through.
Yeah, exactly. Or what could come over someone for that to occur to them, even to do it.
I mean, that's a monster. I can wrap my head around, shaken baby syndrome. I mean, not that it's right by any stretch, but it's something that you can read and you can understand, but this is something like what triggered this whole thing, that he would sexually assault her and then treat her like a dog toy. There's no other way to put it. I just don't know. My daughter, who has never talked about it, the only thing that she had ever said was that she had heard Quortney crying and crying and crying, and then she just wasn't crying anymore. And she got scared, and that's the only thing that she's ever mentioned, and that was right after it happened. And I think part of it was that she saw how upset I was and how hard it was for me. And I think sometimes she feels like she doesn't want to put any more onto that, that she held off on some of these things because she didn't want to upset me. And I think that, after a while you forget, or you don't remember as much detail, or, your mind just blocks it out. Again, I was reading one of the reports, and one of the people that had interviewed Christina had made the comment that she was going to have a very rough life ahead. And we have been very lucky. And, I've tried everything possible to protect her. And sometimes I feel like I've gone overboard. It was probably the first official helicopter mother, maybe. She was always with me. She wasn't out of my sight. It was really hard for me to let her go. Even, when she got out of high school, moved out, I was constantly worried and scared that something else was going to happen. This last 24 years, I always feel like the other shoe's going to fall. What is it that's going to top this? But, Christina's done great. She is a very well-functioning adult. We never had problems with drugs or alcohol, like some kids will tend to do. She's not jumped from relationship to relationship. She's done very well. I'm very proud of her.
Yeah, she definitely deserves success. She certainly had to go through enough at too young of an age.
But, I was also, proactive in getting her into counseling right away and trying to help when these things would pop up. She ended up at 5.5 with a severe case of psoriasis, covering almost her entire body, which is triggered by stress. On top of the night terrors, she woke up one morning and she looked like she had chickenpox. That's probably the worst thing that she's had to carry this whole time is the physical marks of that. Her whole scalp at one point would be just one big patch of psoriasis. It was horrible for her. But, she's a lot stronger than she realizes, that's for sure. It was really hard. We had my oldest son, when he would cry, she would get hysterical. And, she would insist that my husband was hurting the baby. And I would say, no, upset because your dad's changing his diaper. You got to understand the sounds. There's different cries. And, it took her a really long time to get a little bit comfortable with the cry of a baby. And she had her own kids, and it was really difficult for her. Times where she just had to put her hands over her ears and just walk away and have somebody else take over because she just couldn't handle the crying. I know that's a trigger for her, but she's figured out how to handle it very well.
That's so traumatic, and especially for that to be the one thing that she remembers, the crying. Yeah. It's not something you can avoid in life. You're going to hear a baby crying anywhere at any time.
Once we were able to kind of pinpoint, there's different cries. And as a mom, you recognize those different cries, oh, he's hungry or he's hurt or she's wet, whatever the case may be, or she's just not happy right now.
Right.
And so, once she learned the difference between the I'm hurt cry and the other cries, that's when she finally calmed down.
How soon after the whole thing happened did you start digging into all the information?
It was pretty quick because I didn't know anything. They weren't telling me anything. I had gone in for an interrogation and I was in there for quite a while. I want to say I was in there for about 3 hours. And when I came out of the room, my family was sitting at the police department waiting for me. They just had the looks on their faces of, I don't even know how to describe it, but it had played on the news what had happened and that he had sexually assaulted her and killed her. I had not even been told that. I was still under the impression that something had happened, that, she had fallen off the bed or got a bag over her head. I had no idea whatsoever that this had happened.
What did he say to the police? Do you know what he told them?
I have his statement, yeah. So I know what he said. Basically, he said that he had been sitting in the bed with his sweatshirt on, just his sweatshirt. And supposedly she had walked in. And at one point, and I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail, but he had her in between his legs. I guess he was sitting on the side of the bed. And I guess he tried to put his penis in her mouth and she started crying, from what he says in his statement. And he says he put his hand over her mouth and he, holding the back of her head. And he held her like that until she stopped crying. That's what he says, and that's what he insists is how she died. But
it doesn't explain any of the head injuries.
No, it doesn't explain any of it. His statement, in my opinion, is just worthless.
Right.
Anything that was good about it was that he admitted that he had killed her and that he had assaulted her, but he didn't admit anything else.
So you'll never get the whole story. You just kind of get bits and pieces and put it together yourself.
Right.
Did he ever try to contact you after he went to jail?
Yeah, he did send me one letter. But ironically, as much of the paperwork and everything that I kept, I did not keep a copy of that. I called the police right away and handed it over because he admitted to what he did. It wouldn't even matter what his statement said at that point. He admitted what he did and that he was sorry.
Was Quortney buried or cremated?
She was buried, and I hated every second of it. Felt like I was forced into it because it was a murder. They wanted to preserve her in case they had to exhume her at some point for further testing, this kind of thing. And Quortney did not like the grass. Like, she was kind of that prissy little girl, she had to have her hands clean. When you would try and set her into the ground, set her down to walk in the grass, she would lift her feet. She was like, no, you're not putting me in the grass on the ground. I don't want nothing to do with it. So it was really difficult when it came time for burial, when I was told I couldn't cremate her. Which that thought didn't make me any happier, cremating her. Either way, it wasn't right. It wasn't her time.
No, there should not be such tiny little caskets. You're right. It is not right.
No, hers was pink too.
Oh, how sweet.
It's always been one thing after another. There's always something else to it.
It took 9 years to get him put where he belonged.
Yeah.
And now after 24 years in total, and now he's scheduled to walk out February 25th.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you heard he was being released?
I thought I was going to die. Oh. I really did. I felt horrible.
So sorry. That must have been just the second worst day of your life.
Yeah. I went into shock. I did. Like, I was numb. I'm still numb. I know it was coming. And you would think that over the last year, knowing that he was more than likely going to get out, that I would have been a little bit more ready for it. Was it earlier this year? I want to say the beginning of 2020, I reached out to the state's attorney's office looking for information specifically on, is he going to get out in 2021 or is he going to get out in 2024? How does that work? Why am I seeing this? What does it mean? And the person I talked to said that was a good question. He was going to check it out, find out what it was going on. And of course, I never heard anything back. And, it seems to be the typical situation when it comes to victims. It's like, I feel like the state thinks, well, it's over. We've got them in jail. We've done our job. We don't have to deal with this anymore. And they just kind of put it out to pasture.
Right. Ignoring the fact that you're still dealing with it.
Yeah, we're still dealing with it as victims. We still need help through this system because most people are not trained in how the system works. I've been unfortunate and fortunate enough to go through this case, not only, but then go to school to learn more about it so that I can do my job as a paralegal now.
That's great. It probably helps you navigate it at least somewhat.
Absolutely. And, it really shines a light on who's blowing smoke up my ass. Pardon me, but
that's fine.
It angers me because I know that I am educated enough to know that there are places I can go to get this information, that I know that it exists somewhere. There are, I think, a lot of people that either might not be as well versed in the law, or they just think that they, digress to whoever is in charge and don't think that they should look somewhere else. And they think that the information they're given is correct and accurate. So when they have somebody from the state call them and tell them it's not worth it, or, there's just no way to get that information, it's absolutely false. And I think they're doing a great disservice to the people that rely on them.
And in a case like this, where Kane County has lost pretty much everyone in their victim advocate area, it doesn't leave you with many options as far as other places to go and get the information.
Not at all. And so the victims get lost, like you say, the victims in these cases get lost and you don't hear about them and, you don't know who they are. You just know that the system is broken in areas. And I don't understand why, we can see these breaks in the system, but we do nothing to fix them.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's kind of, I get this feeling like, oh, well, they're not talking about it right now. We'll just deal with it the next time it comes around.
And someone else is unnecessarily hurt, or so many of these things could be prevented, or at the very least mitigated.
Absolutely.
Do you know, or does anyone know yet where he plans to live when he gets out of prison?
From what I understand, he is working on getting approval to live with his father.
Oh, boy.
I personally see this as a problem, as his dad is a felon. I would assume that as a felon, you cannot be on parole living with another felon. I always kind of assumed that that was a law, or that I had read it or heard it somewhere. Every state's different, so who knows? But, that was where my question came into play yesterday was, number one, would he be able to live with a felon? And the response I got was, well, his dad's probably older, in his 70s, 75, whatever. He's probably not a risk. That has nothing to do with him living there or not. And so I said to her, well, let's say, and this was my hypothetical to her, was let's say that he's unable to get approval for his father's. If he has no other family, and I'm sure he has no other friends, where does he go? What do you do? I said, I'm assuming that you're not going to strap a bracelet on his leg and throw him on the next train out of town. She had no answer. I said, I would assume that he would go to some type of halfway house or something of that nature where they would be able to keep some of an eye on him, I suppose. I don't know. I don't know where he would go. That's a concerning answer to me. And I think it's a legitimate question. And I think as a victim advocate, it would be a question that you should know the answer to. And, it's important if you're in that position that you are doing a good service for, the people that you're dealing with. It just doesn't make sense to me. They would have to have an address of where he was going to be on the offenders registry.
Because he does have to register as a sex offender.
Absolutely. It's also a special kind of sick to be the person to go after somebody that just cannot fight back whatsoever, that has no recourse.
The most vulnerable. So before we wrap up, I definitely want to ask you about Quortney herself and what she was like, the things she liked and her favorite things to do, things you remember about her.
She was so little, but there are some things, she was just coming into her personality. One of the things with her is she was so stubborn. I have never met a child that was as stubborn as she was. Like when she wanted it, she was going to have it no matter what you said or what you did. And so my mother-in-law, she at one point told me when Christina was little that you don't move things out of the way for kids. You just teach them not to touch it, which I always thought was good advice. And so there was an ashtray in the house that was on the table, and she would always try and get it. She would get her hand in it, and I would grab her hand and I'd tell her, no, don't touch. It's not yours. And I'd put it back. And she would instantly reach right back over there to grab it. We would go through this 7 or 8 times. I got tears running down the face, staring at me as she reaches for it again. I'm like, just stop. She
wow.
so determined. And after she died, I was cleaning out her room and she was having a really hard time. And I pull out her playpen. We had one of the small playpens from when she was real little. And I had folded it up and I had put it behind her door, and that's where it had sat for quite a while. And I pulled it out to move it. And when I pulled it out, I found about 12 lighters backside of the playpen.
She had a collection.
I thought to myself, so this is how she's trying to get me to quit smoking. It was just, little things, her and Christina, when they take a bath together. And I'd hear this for a long time when I'd fall asleep was them playing. And they would sit there, and it was almost like who could get the loudest echo in the bathroom. Quortney would just go, ah! Christina would do it back, and then Quortney would giggle and she'd do it even louder. And they would do this for like 5 or 10 minutes until I'd go in there, or, finally I'd say, okay, you guys got to stop. This is too much. It's too loud. One of her things was she'd always want to sit on my face with her wet diaper. The one night I was trying to get her to go to sleep, and it was late and she just didn't want to sleep. And so, it was the tossing and the turning where she'd roll this way and she'd roll that way. And then she'd be, down at the one end of the bed and she'd come back up. And then out of nowhere, she just got up and came over and just plopped her butt right on my soaking wet diaper. And then started dancing.
Oh, no.
Like, you rotten little snot, get up for me.
Oh my gosh.
Towards the end, when she really started with the personality, and, she'd have these little silly things that she would do. She had just started caring for her babies, and pushing her little stroller around with the baby doll in it, or she'd, pretend grocery shop.
Oh.
And it was just cute because she wasn't really talking much. She would get maybe a couple words, but she would, do the gibberish to her babies, and she'd just lean down and just start blah, 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 blah to them, and it was just so cute because she would get like right down in her face, and, almost like I did with her when I was talking to her. She'd be so sweet to her babies, and she would be, I could tell she was asking if they were okay, if they were hungry, or, typical things that a mom would ask a baby,
That's so cute.
So animated that way. And, for the longest time, for the rest of the time I was in that apartment, I would constantly see her, walking around the corner, crawling around the corner with her baby all the time.
Wow.
And I kept that baby, and that baby's in a box with the last bottle she had.
Yeah.
She was wearing.
The outfit she was wearing.
I got the judge to okay me having that item because it was in evidence. And so they allowed me to have that so that I could have that. And there's been some odd, I have clips of her hair and, things like that.
The little red-haired kids just get to me. They're so cute.
Yeah, and it's not the typical red. It's like that bright orange red hair. That's how it was really pretty. And, she's finally growing it out, and it was getting little curls at the bottom.
Oh, not quite long enough to ponytail, but still long enough to curl it around your finger.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good that you have mementos. Time may pass and memories fade, but the things you have in your hands, you'll never forget them.
I have an Ernie doll from Sesame Street that I had gotten her, and you squeeze it and it sings Old MacDonald Has a Farm. And she would run around with that thing, and she'd turn it on, and then she would just rock back and forth like she was just dancing away. It's sad that, I wasn't given the opportunity to know her longer, and, to see all the things that she would have accomplished.
And for Christina, not to have the sister that she could have had growing up with.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that she's doing well, and sounds like she's a great mom.
I think sometimes she worries about things that she shouldn't worry about because of this. She worries more about this or that. If one of the kids is sick and she has to take him to the hospital, she's like, is DCF going to get involved? And I'm like, no.
Oh.
She just associates all of that with her sister. And so, the littlest thing causes her anxiety that something's going to happen to her kids. They're going to be taken away, or because they took Christina away from me because they thought that I knew that Cayce was doing this stuff and that I ignored it.
Even though there were no older injuries, no evidence at all.
Yeah, the hospital took custody of Christina that night, and I stayed with her, and I didn't leave until they left with her. Yeah, she lived with a foster parent for a little bit, and I and Christina got very, very lucky that we had an amazing foster mother on our case, I do have to say. She read, knew about the case from the newspaper. But when she saw Christina and I together on our first visit, she understood and realized very quickly that I had nothing to do with any of this. And so she didn't make it difficult for me to see her. She brought Christina to the funeral.
And how long was it before you got Christina back?
I want to say it was about 6 months. I actually got her back a lot quicker than most people. by the time I got her back, I had the Department of Children and Family Services. I had they call it a Cayce worker up there. Here we call it a guardian ad litem. I think every state's a little different, but they were all going in and telling the court that they needed to give this child back to me, that there wasn't any problems with me. It was, basically it was him. I had no idea. I just picked a bad babysitter is kind of how it ended up. I had been charged with a laundry list of items that they ended up dropping down to insufficient daycare. And I had to plead guilty to insufficient daycare to get my daughter back. They wouldn't give her back otherwise.
It's just horrible that they made you plead guilty to an offense, just victimizing you as a victim again. That's unthinkable. Very unfair, but I'm just relieved that they gave Christina back to you.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad because she's great.
Aw. I'm just so sorry that you have to deal with this again on top of everything else that you've dealt with over the past 24 years.
Yeah. Like I had my counselor once tell me that maybe it would be easier for me to forgive him if he had a mental issue, that only somebody with a mental issue would do something like this. And I did think about that for a little bit because it is a good point. People can't help having mental issues. From all of this, I have PTSD, I have depression, I have anxiety. I have a ton of anxiety.
Of course.
So I take a handful of pills every day, and it sucks that I have to do this.
But you have to do what gets you through, and with your other kids to think of course.
Absolutely.
It's got to be an everyday struggle.
It is, for the most part. And every once in a while, I get woke up by the bathtub yells. I still will hear it. Like I'll be almost completely asleep. And like she's in the other room yelling from the bathroom. I hear it like plain as day.
I'm really glad that we were able to talk and that you were able to tell us a little bit more about Quortney, because she sounds like just such a sweet, sassy little thing. Yeah, she really sounded like a special kid, and I definitely don't want her to be forgotten in all this.
No, not at all.
Heartfelt thanks to Gretta for speaking so candidly and openly with me and letting us know who her daughter was. Quortney is undoubtedly the most important part of this story. She had her whole life ahead of her. If she was alive today, she would be turning 26 in June. She'd still be her sister Christina's best friend, and she might have gorgeous red-headed babies of her own to be spoiled rotten by their grandma and to play with their cousins. In the photo album for this episode, I'll include several pictures Gretta shared with me of her beautiful family. I'll also include some photos of Cayce Williams, including his 1997 mugshot and his current prison photo for the public's protection. I even did a little photo editing and came up with a rendering of what he might look like if he shaves his beard. Gretta and Christina have created a Facebook page called Justice for Quortney Kley, and I'll include a link to the page in my show notes, along with a link to an event they've created, which is a protest taking place on Wednesday, February 24th at 1 p.m. outside the Dixon Correctional Center in Dixon, Illinois. If you're in the area and can attend, I'm sure they can use the support. While we want to keep Cayce Michael Williams' name and face in the public eye for the protection of other children, and we also want to make sure no one forgets the horrific crimes he committed, more importantly, we have to remember what and who he took from this world. Quortney Alexandria Kley, a beautiful little girl with red hair and blue eyes, a treasured miracle baby who was just coming into her personality when her life was stolen by a man whose responsibility it was to keep her safe. Rest in peace, Quortney. You are so loved, and we will never forget you. That's it for this week. Join me next week for another case. If you like the show, please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. And please subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlecHildren.pod@gmail.com. You can also subscribe on YouTube by searching Suffer the Little Children Podcast. Visit the website at www.sufferthelittlecHildrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes and become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter at STLCpod. View photos related to today's case on Facebook and Instagram. Read more about today's case and many others at sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast was written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. Intro theme music is by Dreamnote Music. Other music and sound effects for the show were created using sounds from audiojungle.net. Hug your babies a bit closer tonight. Until next week, bye guys.